He was told to leave the restaurant, because he didn't look like he belonged. But what no one knew was that the entire room was about to collapse under one truth. The waiter smirked, the guests laughed, until the manager walked in and froze. One name changed everything. One silence destroyed every assumption in the room. And when the truth finally came out, nobody dared to speak again. The restaurant existed in a world untouched by ordinary time. Inside its walls, minutes didn't move forward, they hovered, suspended like dust in golden light. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen constellations, their glow soft and deliberate, casting a quiet authority over everything beneath them. Every table was dressed in perfect linen. Every glass aligned with surgical precision. Every fork, every knife, every detail whispered the same thing without ever needing to say it. You don't just enter this place, you are accepted into it. The air carried a subtle weight, the low murmur of restrained wealth. Conversations never rose above a certain pitch. Even laughter felt trained, softened, disciplined. Footsteps vanished into thick carpets designed not just for comfort, but for silence. Nothing here was accidental. Everything here was controlled. And at the center of this perfectly curated stillness, sat a man who did not belong. He occupied a small table near the aisle. Not hidden. Not highlighted. Just there. His chair creaked faintly when he shifted his weight, a sound so foreign in that environment it felt almost offensive. Furniture here wasn't meant to remind anyone it existed. His clothes were clean, but worn, a simple button-down shirt, softened at the elbows from use. Sleeves rolled casually, not for style, but out of habit. Jeans that carried the quiet marks of time, not fashion, not design, just life. His hair fell naturally, slightly unkempt, untouched by product or intention. There was nothing performative about him. No effort to impress. No attempt to belong. He sat alone. A glass of water rested in front of him, untouched. His hands lay calmly on the table, fingers relaxed, as if he had nowhere else to be. His gaze drifted slowly across the room, not with longing, not with envy, but with quiet curiosity. Like someone observing rain. Or traffic. Or a world that didn't define him. If he felt out of place, he didn't show it. If he felt judged, he didn't react, but judgment had already begun. The waiter noticed him the moment he stepped onto the floor. He had been trained for this. Years in elite spaces had sharpened his instincts into something almost surgical. He didn't just see guests, he read them. Clothes, posture, tone, hesitation, everything spoke a language. And this man? He didn't speak it. Not poor. Not exactly. Just, wrong. Misaligned. He didn't signal status. He didn't broadcast belonging. He didn't follow the silent rules that everyone else obeyed without thinking. The waiter paused near the service station, eyes narrowing just slightly. Something about the man disrupted the symmetry. And in a place like this, disruption wasn't tolerated. It was corrected. He approached the table with practiced precision. Spine straight. Chin slightly lifted. Steps measured. Every movement rehearsed to project control. But his expression betrayed him. A smile tried to form, and failed halfway, collapsing into something sharper. Something colder. He stopped at the table. And for a moment, said nothing. Instead, he glanced down at the untouched glass of water. Then at the man's shirt. Then back at the glass. As if confirming a suspicion he had already decided was true. Finally. Sir. His voice wasn't loud. But it wasn't private either. It was perfectly calibrated to be heard by the tables nearby. The man looked up. His expression was calm. Open. Patient. Yes. The waiter tilted his head slightly, that familiar gesture people use when pretending to be polite, right before they aren't. I believe there's been a mistake. The man didn't interrupt. Didn't question. He simply waited. This section, the waiter continued, gesturing subtly to the surrounding tables, is reserved. A pause followed. Not forced. Not dramatic. Just space. I have a reservation, the man replied. Calmly. The waiter let out a short breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh. I'm sure you do, he said. But his tone made it clear. He wasn't. At the table beside them, a woman glanced up briefly, her eyes flicking between the two before quickly looking away. Across the room, a group of diners slowed their conversation, sensing the shift. The energy had changed. The waiter leaned in slightly. Lowered his voice. But not enough. Sir, this is a luxury establishment. We maintain certain standards. The word standards lingered in the air. Heavy. Sharp. The man nodded once. Slowly. Of course. The waiter straightened, emboldened by the lack of resistance. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable elsewhere. The man's eyes didn't change. Elsewhere, he repeated. Yes, the waiter said, now enjoying himself. We have other restaurants in the city, more appropriate. The implication landed exactly as intended. A man nearby smirked into his wine glass. Another shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But no one spoke. They never did. Silence was part of the experience. The man glanced around the room briefly. The man looked up. His expression was calm. Open. Patient. Yes. The waiter tilted his head slightly, that familiar gesture people use when pretending to be polite, right before they aren't. I believe there's been a mistake. The man didn't interrupt. Didn't question. He simply waited. This section, the waiter continued, gesturing subtly to the surrounding tables, is reserved. A pause followed. Not forced. Not dramatic. Just space. I have a reservation, the man replied. Calmly. The waiter let out a short breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh. I'm sure you do, he said. But his tone made it clear. He wasn't. At the table beside them, a woman glanced up briefly, her eyes flicking between the two before quickly looking away. Across the room, a group of diners slowed their conversation, sensing the shift. The energy had changed. The waiter leaned in slightly. Lowered his voice. But not enough. Sir, this is a luxury establishment. We maintain certain standards. The word standards lingered in the air. Heavy. Sharp. The man nodded once. Slowly. Of course. The waiter straightened, emboldened by the lack of resistance. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable elsewhere. The man's eyes didn't change. Elsewhere, he repeated. Yes, the waiter said, now enjoying himself. We have other restaurants in the city, more appropriate. The implication landed exactly as intended. A man nearby smirked into his wine glass. Another shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But no one spoke. They never did. Silence was part of the experience. The man glanced around the room briefly. Not searching for help. Not asking for support. Just observing. Then he looked back at the waiter. I'll wait for the menu. Simple. Quiet. Final. The waiter's jaw tightened. I don't think you understand, he said, raising his voice just enough to draw more attention. We don't serve just anyone here. The word anyone echoed. And now. People were watching. Fully watching. The room grew still. Conversations paused. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. The man didn't raise his voice. Didn't defend himself. Didn't push back, he just sat there. "I understand perfectly," he said. And somehow, that calmness made everything worse. "You're making a scene," the waiter snapped. The man's brow furrowed slightly. Not in anger. In confusion. "I'm sitting," he replied. A few quiet reactions rippled through the room. The waiter laughed, too sharply. "This isn't the place to pretend," he said. Pretend. That word cut deeper than the rest. And now, the shift was undeniable. This wasn't service anymore. It was humiliation. And it had become entertainment. "I came here for dinner," the man said. "That's all." The waiter leaned closer, his voice dropping into something raw, something unfiltered. "And we're telling you, you're not welcome." Silence. Absolute. No clinking glasses. No whispers. Just the weight of a room choosing comfort over conscience. The man sat there. Surrounded by wealth. By status. By judgment. Stripped of dignity, not by force. But by assumption. Every eye in the room told him the same story. "You don't belong here." And for a long moment, no one knew who he really was. The moment didn't end when the waiter spoke. It stretched. In places like this, humiliation was never loud or sudden. It didn't explode, it unfolded. Slowly. Deliberately. Like a performance designed to last just long enough for everyone to witness, and no one to interrupt. The waiter didn't walk away. That would have been too simple. Instead, he lingered. Close enough that the man could still feel him there, like a shadow refusing to detach. He adjusted his vest, smoothed the front of his apron, and shifted his stance just enough to appear professional while still maintaining control over the space. It was subtle. Calculated. Cruel in a way that could always be explained later. The man remained seated. Still. Composed. His hands rested lightly near the base of the water glass. He didn't fidget. Didn't check his phone, didn't look for distraction. He simply stayed present, as if waiting was not something being forced onto him, but something he had chosen. That calm began to feel unnatural. Not weak. Not passive. Just, unshakable. And that made the waiter uneasy. Because calm like that didn't beg. It didn't react. It didn't follow the script. The waiter snapped his fingers once, a sharp, quiet signal. A busser appeared almost instantly. Young. Nervous. Holding a tray like it might shield him from whatever tension he had just stepped into, the waiter spoke in a tone that was too bright, too cheerful. "Can you check something for me?" He gestured vaguely toward the table, not quite pointing, as if even acknowledging the man directly was beneath him. The busser's eyes flicked to the seated guest. Then away. He nodded quickly. Too quickly. And disappeared. The waiter watched him go with a faint expression of satisfaction. As if the room itself had just confirmed his authority. Around them, the restaurant tried to recover. Conversations restarted, but not fully. Voices were lower now. Pauses stretched longer between sentences. People pretended not to watch. While continuing to watch. The elegance of the room hadn't vanished. But something had shifted underneath it. Something human. Something uncomfortable. At a table near the back, a woman leaned closer to her friend, whispering with the same excitement reserved for scandal. Across the aisle, a man in a tailored jacket lifted his glass slightly, hiding a smirk behind the reflection. At another table, someone shifted in their seat, not in protest, but in quiet discomfort. No one intervened. No one ever did. Because stepping in meant stepping out of the system. And nobody in that room wanted to risk that. The waiter returned. Not with a menu. Not with service. But with intention. He stopped just at the edge of the man's space, angling his body so his shadow stretched across the tablecloth. A silent message. Control. I'll have to ask again, he said. This time his voice was softer. Smoother. But underneath it, something sharp. Do you have a reservation under a name? The man looked up. Yes. And the name is? The man gave it. Clearly. Calmly. Without hesitation. The waiter nodded slowly. As if processing something important. Then he paused. Letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel deliberate. His smile returned, but now it was thinner. Sharper. I'm not seeing it. He hadn't checked anything. The man didn't react. Maybe it's under another spelling, he said. The waiter lifted an eyebrow, amused. Maybe, he echoed. Then he let the word hang. Or maybe, the sentence didn't finish. It didn't need to. He gestured toward the front of the restaurant, where the host stand glowed under warm light. We can sort it out at the entrance. The man's gaze didn't move. I'm fine here. Something in the waiter's expression cracked. Just for a second. Then hardened. Sir, he said louder now, making sure nearby tables could hear again, this table is not available to you. Not reserved. Not occupied. Not assigned. Just. Not yours. The man glanced down briefly at the linen. Then back up. I'm not causing trouble. The waiter smiled. That word delighted him. Trouble, he repeated softly, leaning in. Isn't always loud. His eyes flicked over the man's shirt. The worn sleeves. The collar. Sometimes, he said, it looks like confusion. Confusion. That was how he reframed it. Not exclusion. Not judgment. Just a mistake. The kind that needed correcting. The man's jaw tightened slightly. A small movement. Then relaxed again. He said nothing. And the silence gave the waiter room to continue. You see, the waiter began, straightening as if addressing not just the man, but the entire room, there are expectations here. A faint laugh echoed somewhere behind them. Quickly swallowed. People come here for an experience, he continued. They don't come to be distracted. A few heads nodded. Subtly. Instinctively. The waiter gestured lightly toward the surrounding tables. Real guests. The phrase landed harder than he intended. Or maybe exactly as intended. The man blinked slowly. Then looked around again. But this time. He wasn't observing casually, he was seeing. The couple at the adjacent table, frozen between discomfort and silence. The man across the aisle, watching openly now, entertained. The older woman near the back, her gaze sharp, approving, as if this was necessary to maintain order. The woman who had almost spoken earlier, now staring down at her napkin, folding it, unfolding it, unable to decide who she wanted to be in this moment. The room revealed itself. Without saying a word. The waiter leaned closer again. Lowering his voice. Listen, he said. I'm trying to help you. The word help sounded almost kind. If you leave quietly, he continued, no one has to make a big deal out of this. The man looked at him. You've already made it a big deal. A ripple moved through the nearest tables. The waiter's smile tightened. Oh, he said, louder now. So now you want to argue? I'm not arguing, the man replied. I'm answering. That calm tone. It was starting to feel dangerous. Not because it was aggressive. Because it wasn't. It refused to escalate. And that made it impossible to control. The waiter stepped back slightly, spreading his hands in exaggerated patience. Of course, he said. I just thought, given the circumstances, you might want to avoid anything that could complicate payment. Payment. There it was. The final weapon. The one that always surfaced when dignity needed to be stripped clean. The man didn't reach for his wallet. Didn't prove anything. Didn't perform security. I didn't ask you to choose for me, he said. The waiter's expression flickered. Then sharpened again. So, he said, tapping lightly on the table, are we going to do this the easy way, or the hard way? The man met his eyes. What's the hard way? The waiter turned his head slightly. Scanning the room, his gaze landed near the bar. Security. A subtle nod. A signal. Then he smiled again. The hard way, he said, is when someone has to escort you out. That changed everything. The room felt it immediately. Because now, it wasn't social anymore. It was physical. It would become real. The man looked at him. And for the first time, something shifted in his eyes. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. Like he had seen this before. Too many times. I'm not here to fight, he said. I'm here to eat. The waiter laughed. Short. Cold. Then eat somewhere else. Silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence. It was heavier now. Thicker. Charged. The waiter turned slightly toward the room. I apologize for the disruption, he announced. As if the man were the problem. As if this were being handled. Then he leaned in one last time. Soft voice. Sharp edges. People come here to enjoy themselves, he said. They don't want to be part of, whatever this is. At the adjacent table, the woman finally shifted. Her discomfort rising to the surface. She opened her mouth. Then stopped. A hand on her wrist. A quiet warning. Not here, not now. Stay safe. She looked down again. The man noticed. But didn't hold her gaze. Didn't ask for anything. Didn't expect anything. The waiter straightened. I'm going to give you one last chance, he said. Stand up. Walk out. And I'll pretend you were never here. The man looked at him. Why do you need to pretend? The question landed like a crack in glass. For a moment. The waiter had no answer. Then he recovered. Because this is embarrassing. The man tilted his head slightly. For who? That was the moment. The shift. Small. But irreversible. The question lingered in the air. For who? It didn't echo loudly. It didn't demand attention. But it cracked something invisible. Something the room had been carefully maintaining since the moment the tension began. For a brief second, no one moved. Not the diners. Not the waiter. Not even the quiet rhythm of the restaurant. Then the waiter's expression tightened. His pride, once smooth and controlled, now flickered with something sharper, something closer to irritation. Look around, he snapped, louder than before. You're making people uncomfortable. The man did look around. Slowly. Deliberately. And what he saw was not what the waiter expected. He saw eyes avoiding his. He saw faces pretending not to watch. He saw curiosity disguised as indifference. He saw discomfort, but not the kind the waiter described. Then he looked back at him. I didn't make them uncomfortable, he said quietly. A pause. You did. The sentence didn't feel like an argument. It felt like a mirror. And for the first time, the waiter hesitated, just for a moment. But that moment was enough. Because hesitation, in a place built on certainty, was dangerous. The waiter turned abruptly, scanning the room as if searching for reinforcement. For authority. For something bigger than himself. His eyes landed near the service area. And then. He raised his hand. Sharp. Commanding. Get the manager, he said. Not quietly. Not discreetly. But loud enough for the room to hear. For someone refusing to comply. The phrase carried weight. It reframed everything. Not humiliation. Not exclusion, but non-compliance. A problem. A disruption. Something that needed to be handled. The man didn't react. Didn't defend himself. Didn't argue. He remained seated. Still. Calm. Like a mountain watching a storm build beneath it. Across the room, something shifted again. This time deeper. More serious. Because the moment had crossed a line. This wasn't just tension anymore. This was escalation. And escalation demanded resolution. The waiter returned to the table once more. But now, the mask of politeness was gone. His voice was sharper. Colder. You're not going to win this, he said. The man met his gaze. I'm not trying to win. That answer landed differently. It didn't challenge. It didn't provoke. It removed the game entirely. And without a game, the waiter had nothing to dominate. That realization unsettled him. Because control only exists when both sides agree to the rules. And the man had quietly refused them. For a brief second, the waiter leaned closer. Lowered his voice so only the man could hear. And in that private tone, his cruelty became honest. You think you can walk in here, he whispered, and be treated like you matter? A pause. You don't, then just as quickly. He straightened. Mask back on. Professional again. As if nothing had been said. But something had. And the man heard it. Fully. Clearly. Without reaction. For the first time, though. The waiter felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not exactly. But, doubt. Because the man's stillness didn't break. Didn't crack. Didn't respond the way it should have. It didn't shrink. It didn't fight. It simply remained. And that made the waiter feel exposed. Then. Movement. From across the room. Subtle. Controlled, but unmistakable. The manager was coming. He didn't rush. Didn't panic. Didn't raise his voice. He walked with measured precision, the kind that didn't need to announce authority because it was authority. Shoulders relaxed. Hands loosely positioned. Eyes alert. Watching everything. Missing nothing. And as he moved through the dining floor, the restaurant changed. Conversations softened. Forks paused mid-air. A laugh died before it could finish. The room began to watch. Not casually. But completely. Because this was the moment. The waiter felt it instantly. His posture snapped into place. His expression shifted. Aggression dissolved into concern. Control turned into performance. By the time the manager reached the table, the waiter was no longer the aggressor. He was the professional dealing with a problem. I'm sorry to bother you, he began smoothly, voice polished and calm. We have a guest who is refusing to cooperate. The word guest sounded almost generous. As if it were being offered rather than deserved. He doesn't have a reservation, the waiter continued, and he's insisting on staying in a reserved section. A slight pause. I try to assist him, but he's making a scene. The narrative was clean. Controlled. Convincing. And for a moment. It almost worked. The manager didn't respond immediately. His eyes moved to the man. then back to the waiter. A small pause followed. Barely noticeable. But the room felt it. Then the manager spoke. "Sir," he said calmly, turning to the seated man. "Is there an issue?" The man looked up. Met his gaze. "I'm here for dinner," he said. "Your staff is telling me I'm not welcome." No emotion. No accusation. Just truth. Simple. Clear. Heavy. A few diners shifted in their seats. Because if that sentence was true, then the restaurant, this flawless, polished space, had just revealed something ugly beneath its surface. The waiter stepped in quickly. Smiling. Controlled. "I tried to explain," he said, with a small shrug. "We're fully booked. We have standards. This table is reserved." He glanced briefly at the surrounding diners. "I even offered to help him find somewhere more appropriate." A pause. "But he insists on staying." The manager's gaze returned to the man. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes." "Under what name?" The man gave it again. Calmly. Clearly. The same way he had before. No hesitation. No performance. The waiter's face twitched slightly at the sound. Not recognition. Something else. Something tighter. The manager nodded. Then turned toward the host stand. Raised his hand. A quiet signal. The host responded immediately. Professional. Precise. But now, there was tension in her movements. Her fingers moved quickly over the reservation system. Her eyes flicked between the screen and the table. The room watched her. Closely. Because suddenly, everything depended on what she would find. The waiter didn't like the silence. So he filled it. "It's not personal," he said again, louder this time. "It's policy. We can't have anyone walking in and taking reserved tables." He gestured subtly to the diners. "People pay for an experience." A few faint nods. A few quiet agreements. But not as confident as before. Because something had shifted. The man wasn't reacting. Wasn't breaking. Wasn't playing the role anymore. And the longer that continued, the harder it became to believe the waiter. At the host stand. A pause. A small hesitation. The host's fingers slowed. Her expression changed. Just slightly. Then she looked up. Toward the manager. And in that brief glance, something passed. Something unspoken. Something important. The waiter saw it too. And for the first time, his confidence cracked. That glance from the host, it was small. So small most people might have missed it. But in a room built on control, precision, and silent communication, it felt like a tremor beneath the surface. The manager noticed. Of course he did. His attention shifted immediately, subtle but sharp, like a blade turning toward a new angle. "What is it?" he asked quietly. The host hesitated. And hesitation, in a place like this, was dangerous. Because hesitation meant uncertainty. And uncertainty meant something wasn't going according to plan. I do see something," she said. Her voice was careful now. Measured. As if each word had to pass through caution before being allowed to exist. The room leaned in. Not physically. But emotionally. The kind of attention that fills silence without making a sound. The manager stepped closer to the host stand. "Go on." She swallowed lightly. "There is a reservation under that name." The sentence landed. Softly. But heavily. A shift rippled through the room. It was subtle. But real. The certainty that had once belonged to the waiter began to dissolve. But, the host added. That single word brought everything back into tension. The waiter seized it immediately. But, he repeated, letting out a quick laugh. Exactly. His confidence tried to return. Too fast. Too loud. What does that even mean? He added, turning slightly toward the manager. As if to say. See? Confusion. The manager didn't smile. What do you mean, but? He asked. The host glanced down at the screen again. Then back up. It's marked differently. The waiter let out another laugh. Sharper this time. For what? VIP, he said mockingly. But the host didn't respond to him. Her eyes stayed on the manager. It's labeled as internal. Silence. That word didn't echo. It sank. Deep. Into the room. The waiter's smile froze, just for a second. Internal, he repeated, forcing amusement. People call in all the time. That doesn't mean. But he stopped himself. Because even he knew. Internal didn't mean ordinary. Internal meant above him. Above his authority. Above his assumptions. The manager's expression shifted. Not dramatically. But enough. His posture tightened slightly. His eyes returned to the man. And this time. He looked differently. Not as a problem. Not as a disruption. But as something. Uncertain. Potentially dangerous. The waiter felt it, that shift. And panic flickered beneath his confidence. So he pushed harder. Faster. Before the moment could escape him. Internal could mean anything, he said quickly. His voice rising. Defensive now. We still have standards. We can't just let anyone. Enough. The word wasn't loud. But it cut through everything. Clean. Immediate. The waiter stopped. Mid-sentence. Mid-breath. The manager didn't look at him. Not yet. He kept his gaze on the host. Bring me the full note. The host nodded quickly. Relieved to move. Relieved to act, she turned toward the system again. The room shifted again. But this time. It wasn't curiosity. It was uncertainty. Because now. The script was breaking. The waiter stood still. Jaw tight. Eyes flicking between the manager and the man. His authority, the thing he had relied on, was slipping. And he could feel it. The man, meanwhile, remained exactly the same. Seated. Calm. Present. As if none of this surprised him. As if he had seen this pattern before. The manager turned back to him. His tone softer now. Measured. Sir, he said, I'm going to ask for a moment while we verify the details. The man nodded. Take your time. That response hit the room in a strange way. Because it didn't sound like someone worried. It sounded like someone waiting for confirmation. A few diners shifted in their seats. The man in the crisp suit who had been amused earlier was no longer smiling. The woman at the adjacent table looked up again. This time, not with discomfort. But curiosity. Why is he so calm? The question moved silently through the room. The waiter felt the shift, and it terrified him. Because control depended on belief. And belief was slipping. So he made a decision. A bad one. He stepped forward again. Closing the distance between himself and the man. Reclaiming space. Reclaiming dominance. Sir, he said, louder now. Sharper. If you're going to stay, I need to see a card. Payment. Right now. The room froze. The manager's head snapped toward him. That's not necessary. But the waiter pushed. It is necessary, he insisted. Because now. He wasn't protecting the restaurant, he was protecting himself. If he orders and can't pay, it becomes our problem, he said. Our guest's problem. He gestured again toward the room. As if they were fragile. As if they needed protection from the possibility of someone like this man existing among them. The word wasn't spoken. But everyone heard it. Poverty. The man looked at him. And for the first time. His eyes sharpened. I didn't ask to be interrogated. The waiter's lips curled. Then don't put yourself in situations that require it. Silence. Cold. Heavy. Different from before. This wasn't discomfort anymore. This was something else. A line had been crossed. Not socially. Not professionally. But morally. The room felt it. A couple near the back quietly signaled for their check. Not out of protest. But out of unease. Another diner shifted his chair slightly away. As if distance could remove responsibility. The manager stepped forward. This time with presence. With weight. Enough. Again. Not loud. But final. The waiter froze. This time. He felt it. We will handle verification through the host stand, the manager said. Do not demand payment in front of guests. The waiter's face flushed. But. Do not. That second time. Was different, it wasn't correction. It was warning. And the room felt it. A quiet exhale moved through nearby tables. Relief. Tension releasing. But not fully. Because now. The question had changed. If the waiter was wrong. Then who was the man? The waiter stepped back. Slowly. His pride burning. His authority cracking. But instead of learning. He hardened. His eyes fixed on the man. Not with uncertainty. But with resentment. Because in his mind. This wasn't correction. This was defiance. The manager turned slightly toward the host again. Bring it here, he said. The host printed something quickly. A small slip. But official. The manager took it. Read it once. Then again. His expression didn't explode. Didn't reveal everything. But something changed. Deep. Immediate. His jaw tightened. His eyes sharpened. Then. He looked at the man again. And this time. There was no uncertainty left. Only realization. The room didn't know what he had read. But it felt the shift. Because authority had just recognized something. Important. And nothing in that restaurant would be the same after it. The change in the manager's face was subtle. So subtle that, in another setting, it might have gone unnoticed. But here, in a room trained to read the smallest shifts in power, it landed like a silent alarm. He read the note again. Not because he needed to. But because he wanted to be absolutely certain. And when he looked up this time, everything about him had changed. His posture remained controlled. His voice would remain calm. But the energy around him had shifted. The man was no longer being evaluated. The situation was. The manager turned toward him carefully. Sir, he said, choosing each word with precision, may I ask you to confirm something, privately? A pause. Perhaps at the host stand, or in the office. The words private office didn't belong to ordinary guests. They belonged to people with weight. With influence. With consequences. The room felt it immediately. Like a drop in temperature. The waiter's eyes widened. Just slightly. But enough. Because for the first time, he wasn't sure anymore. The man didn't rush to stand. Didn't react dramatically, he simply nodded. Sure. Calm. As always. And as he rose from his chair, the room held its breath. It wasn't fear. It wasn't tension. It was something else. Something deeper. Anticipation. Because something had changed. And everyone could feel it. Even if they didn't understand it yet. The man stood fully now. No hesitation. No embarrassment. He adjusted his shirt lightly at the waist. A small, natural movement. Not defensive. Not self-conscious. Just himself. Then he looked around the room. Once. Not accusing. Not searching. Just seeing, and that single glance did more than any argument could have. Because now, the room saw itself. The woman who had almost spoken earlier dropped her gaze instantly. Her cheeks flushed. The man who had smirked into his wine glass suddenly found his plate fascinating. A quiet laugh from the bar came out wrong. Forced. Nervous. The atmosphere shifted. From entertainment to awareness. The manager stepped slightly ahead, guiding the way. Not leading. Not controlling. But respecting distance. They moved toward the front of the restaurant, and as they did, eyes followed. Every table. Every guest. Tracking them. Who is he? Why did the manager change? What did that note say? The questions moved through the room like whispers without sound. The waiter didn't move at first. He stood frozen. Watching. Trying to understand what was happening. And failing. Then slowly. He followed. Not confidently. Not with authority. But with unease. At the host stand, the manager leaned in toward the host. Spoke quietly. Too quietly for the room to hear. The host nodded quickly. Her face pale now. Her hands slightly unsteady. She understood. The waiter tried to move closer. To listen. To regain control. But the manager shifted his position. Just slightly. Blocking him. It was a small movement. Barely noticeable. But it carried a message. You are no longer in control of this. The waiter stopped. His mouth opened. Then closed again. The manager turned toward him. And this time, there was no softness left. Return to your section. The waiter blinked. Now, not loud. But final. The word didn't allow argument. Didn't allow explanation. Didn't allow pride. The waiter's eyes flicked toward the diners. Instinctively. Looking for support. For validation. But the room had changed. The same people who had watched with amusement. Now watched with distance. With judgment. And for the first time, the waiter felt it. What it was like. To be the one under scrutiny. He swallowed. Straightened his shoulders. Forced composure. And turned away. Each step back toward his section felt heavier than the last. Because something was slipping. And he couldn't stop it. At the host stand, the man remained calm. Waiting. As if this moment had always been inevitable. The manager spoke to him again. Quietly. Respectfully. Not like an employee speaking to a problem. But like someone. Handling something important. The room couldn't hear the words. But it didn't need to. Because tone said everything. A shift moved through the diners. Curiosity turned into suspicion. Suspicion turned into realization. Some faces tightened. Others paled slightly. Because slowly, it began to settle in. They might have misjudged him. The host stepped back from the screen. Her eyes wide. Her posture rigid. She leaned in and whispered something to the manager. Just one sentence. The manager's expression didn't explode. Didn't react outwardly. But his eyes closed briefly. As if confirming something irreversible. When he opened them again, there was no doubt left. Only certainty. He turned his head slowly, scanning the dining floor. And then, his gaze landed on the waiter. The room followed that gaze instantly. Like a current. The waiter felt it before he saw it. That sudden attention. That shift. He looked up. Met the manager's eyes. And froze. The manager didn't call out, didn't raise his voice. He simply lifted 2 fingers. A small gesture. Come here. And because real authority doesn't need volume. The waiter moved. His body responded before his pride could argue. As he walked back across the room, everything felt different. The same floor. The same tables. The same guests. But now, they were watching him. Not with approval. Not with amusement. But with something else. Judgment. His hands adjusted his vest again. Out of habit. Out of anxiety. His face arranged itself, trying to rebuild confidence. Trying to regain control. By the time he reached the host stand, his expression was ready. Polished. Concerned. Professional. Everything all right? He asked. Then glanced at the man. With that same thin smile. I told you we'd sort it out. The manager didn't answer immediately. He just looked at him. And that silence felt longer than anything that had come before. Because now, the roles were about to change. The waiter's smile held for a moment. Then it began to crack, because the manager didn't respond. Didn't nod. Didn't acknowledge the performance. He just looked at him. A long, steady gaze that said more than words ever could. The silence stretched. Uncomfortable. Unforgiving. For the first time since this began. The waiter shifted his weight. A small movement. But enough. What exactly did you say to him? The manager asked. His voice was calm. Too calm. The waiter blinked. Caught off guard. But not defeated. Not yet. I explained the policy, he said quickly. Dress code, reservations, standards. Did you tell him we don't serve people like him? The interruption was quiet, but it landed like a strike. A tremor passed through the waiter's face. No, he said too quickly. I was professional. The manager didn't move. Didn't react. But his eyes narrowed slightly. Did you demand payment in front of guests? Another pause. Another trap. I was protecting the restaurant, the waiter replied, louder now. Defensive. We can't have. Stop. One word. Sharp. Final. The waiter froze. Mid-sentence. Mid-breath. For a brief second. He looked like he might argue. Push back. Reclaim control, but something in the manager's posture stopped him. The kind of authority that didn't shout. Because it didn't need to. The manager turned slightly. Toward the man. Sir, he said, voice softening, I want to apologize for the way you were spoken to. The room shifted. Again. A ripple moved through the diners. Small reactions. Barely visible. But real. The waiter's eyes widened. Apologize, he repeated. The word slipped out before he could stop it. A few heads turned. More attention. More pressure. The manager didn't look at him, not yet. You will apologize, he said. Now he did. Their eyes met. The waiter stiffened. His jaw clenched. Why? He asked. The word came out sharper than intended. Raw. Exposed. He walked in like he owns the place. The sentence hung there. Heavy. Unfiltered. And for a split second, something strange happened. A few diners reacted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But enough. Because in trying to insult the man, the waiter had unknowingly stepped too close to the truth. The manager didn't smile. Didn't soften. Didn't explain gently. He simply said. He does. Silence. Not the soft silence of luxury, not the controlled quiet of elegance. But something deeper. Heavier. The kind of silence that expands. Consumes. The waiter's face froze. His brain didn't process the words. Not immediately. Then slowly. It began to. Confusion. First. Then disbelief. Then something darker. No, he said, a weak laugh escaping. That's funny. But no one laughed. Not the manager. Not the host. Not the man. The laughter died on its own. The manager reached for the printed slip. Lifted it slightly, then gestured toward the host screen. This is not a joke, he said. The screen glowed faintly. Data. Information. Internal notes. Details the waiter had never been allowed to see. The manager spoke the name again. Clearly. Carefully. And this time, the room heard it differently. Because it wasn't just a name anymore. It carried weight. Recognition moved through the space. Not everywhere. Not for everyone. But enough. Enough for people to realize. Something was very wrong. The waiter's throat tightened, his eyes flicked to the man. Then to the manager. Then back again. As if searching. For a loophole. A mistake. A way out. But there wasn't one. His hands tightened at his sides. His knuckles paling. I didn't know, he said. Voice breaking. The manager's gaze didn't soften. That's the problem, he replied quietly. You didn't know. A pause. And you decided anyway. That was the moment. The truth. Not about the man. About the waiter. Because this had never been about identity. Or wealth. Or status. It had been about assumption. About the quiet belief. That some people matter. And some people don't. And the room understood it. Not all at once. But enough. A woman who had smirked earlier froze. Fork suspended midair. A man at the corner table set his glass down slowly. Carefully, a couple near the window exchanged a look. Tight. Uncomfortable. Because they had seen it. Participated in it. Even if only through silence. The waiter stepped forward slightly. Uncertain. Shaken. Sir, he said. Voice smaller now. I'm sorry. I truly. The man lifted his hand. Just slightly. Not aggressive. Not dismissive. Just enough to pause him. Don't apologize because you found out, he said quietly. The words were calm. But precise. Apologize because you meant it. Silence again. But this time, It wasn't about shock. It was about understanding. The waiter froze. His mouth opened. Closed. Because there was no script for this. No recovery line. No practiced response. His shoulders tensed. Then dropped. Something inside him was breaking. Not pride. Not yet. Something deeper. The belief that he could decide who mattered. The manager spoke again. Voice steady. Go to the office. The waiter looked up sharply. Fear now visible. Please, he started. I didn't mean, you meant it, the manager said. Quiet. Final. You just didn't think it would cost you. A murmur passed through the room. Soft. Like wind moving through leaves. The kind of sound people make when something uncomfortable becomes undeniable. The waiter stood there for a moment longer. Frozen. Then slowly. He stepped back. His posture collapsing. Piece by piece. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just, gone. And as he turned, walking toward the office, every eye followed him. Not with amusement, but with judgment. The same judgment he had placed on someone else. Now returned. And this time, he felt it. Fully. The man remained where he stood. Calm. Unmoved. He hadn't raised his voice. Hadn't demanded respect. Hadn't revealed himself early. He had simply waited. And in that waiting, the truth had revealed everything. Not just who he was, but who everyone else had chosen to be. The truth didn't explode. It settled. That was the unsettling part. No shouting. No dramatic gasp that shattered the air. No glass slipping from someone's hand. Instead, the truth moved slowly through the restaurant, like a quiet fog seeping into every corner, touching every table, every face, every unspoken thought. He owns the place. The words lingered, invisible but heavy, pressing down on the room with a weight no one could ignore. For a moment, nothing moved. Then everything changed. The same chandeliers still glowed overhead, casting soft golden light across the polished tables. The same music played gently in the background, refined and forgettable. The same waitstaff stood in their perfect uniforms. But the illusion was broken. Because now, everyone understood something they hadn't just minutes ago. They hadn't been watching a man out of place. They had been watching themselves. The waiter stood frozen near the host's stand, his body rigid, his breath shallow. The confidence that once filled his posture had drained completely, leaving something hollow behind. His hands twitched at his sides, unsure where to rest now that they no longer carried authority. He looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. And for the first time that night, he realized something that hadn't even crossed his mind before. This wasn't about a mistake. This was about who he had chosen to be when he thought no one important was watching. His eyes flicked toward the man, no, toward the owner, standing calmly a few feet away. The same simple clothes. The same relaxed posture. The same quiet stillness that now felt different. Not passive. Not uncertain. Powerful. But not in the way the waiter had been trained to recognize. Not loud. Not flashy. Not demanding attention. This was something else entirely. Something deeper. Something that didn't need to prove itself. Around the room, reactions unfolded in silence. A woman near the window slowly set down her fork, her appetite gone. Her expression wasn't shock, it was realization. The kind that comes too late to change what's already happened. At another table, a man who had smirked earlier now stared into his wine glass as if it might offer him a way out. His shoulders had tightened, his earlier confidence dissolving into something quieter, something uneasy. A couple whispered to each other, but their voices carried no amusement now. Only tension. Because the story they thought they were watching had flipped. And suddenly, they weren't just observers anymore. They were participants. The manager stood between two worlds. 1 foot in the system he had spent years mastering, and 1 foot now stepping into something far more dangerous. Truth. He held the printed note in his hand, but it felt heavier than paper. It felt like responsibility. Like consequence. He looked at the waiter again, really looked this time, not as an employee, not as a tool of the restaurant, but as a person who had just exposed something the entire establishment preferred to keep hidden. "You will apologize," the manager had said. And now those words echoed louder than anything else in the room, because they weren't just directed at the waiter. They were directed at everything the restaurant represented. The waiter swallowed hard. His lips parted. Closed. Opened again. He wanted to speak. Wanted to fix it. Wanted to rewind the last 30 minutes and replace them with something cleaner, something safer, something that wouldn't end with him standing here, exposed in front of people who used to silently agree with him. "I didn't know," he said again, his voice barely holding together. But even as the words left his mouth, he understood how empty they sounded, because now, everyone knew. That was never the point. The man, still calm, still steady, watched him without anger. That was the part that hurt the most. Not rage. Not punishment. Just clarity. "You didn't know," the man repeated softly. The waiter nodded quickly, almost desperately. "Yes. Exactly. I didn't. And that's why you said it," the man continued. The sentence cut through him. Not loud. Not aggressive. But precise. The waiter froze. Because there was no argument for that. No defense. No policy to hide behind. The man's voice remained steady. "If you thought I mattered, you would have behaved differently." Silence. The ones who had said nothing. The ones who had quietly agreed. That freedom. That quiet, invisible permission to treat someone differently based on assumption. It wasn't rare. It wasn't unusual. It was normal. And now it had been dragged into the light. The waiter's eyes began to glisten. Not out of sympathy. Not out of performance. But because something inside him had cracked. His entire sense of control, his place in the hierarchy he had relied on, had just been revealed as fragile. Artificial. Temporary. The manager watched this exchange carefully, his own expression tightening. Because he understood something critical. This moment could not be undone. It could only be faced. Around the restaurant, the atmosphere shifted again. But this time, it wasn't tension. It was discomfort. Deep, personal discomfort. A woman at the adjacent table lowered her head, her fingers gripping her napkin tightly. She remembered the moment she almost spoke, and didn't. A man near the bar exhaled slowly, shaking his head just slightly, as if acknowledging something he didn't want to admit. Even those who had enjoyed the spectacle earlier now sat quietly, their expression subdued. Because the truth had removed their distance. They could no longer pretend they were just watching. The waiter tried to speak again. "Sir, I..." But the man lifted his hand slightly. Not aggressively. Just enough. The waiter stopped immediately. "Don't apologize because you found out," the man said. The words landed gently. But they stayed. "Apologize because you meant it." That was the moment everything truly shifted. Because the easy way out was gone. No quick apology, no rehearsed regret. No escape through politeness. Only truth. The waiter stood there, silent, his breathing uneven. For the first time that night, he wasn't performing. He wasn't controlling the situation. He wasn't even trying to impress anyone. He was just there. And it showed. The manager stepped in then, sensing the edge of something deeper, something that could unravel further if left unchecked. "Go to the office," he said quietly. The waiter didn't argue. Didn't resist. Didn't even hesitate. Because something inside him had already shifted. He nodded once, stiffly, then turned. And as he walked across the restaurant floor, something remarkable happened. The eyes that had once supported him, now followed him with judgment, not loud. Not obvious. But undeniable. He had become what he had tried to make someone else. An object of scrutiny. And he felt it. Every step. Every glance. Every silent thought. He reached the hallway and disappeared from view. But the impact of his actions remained. Heavy. Unavoidable. The manager turned back to the man. "Sir," he began. But this time, his voice carried something different. Not authority. Not control. Respect. "Your table is ready." The man nodded slightly. And without urgency, without triumph, without even a hint of satisfaction, he began to walk back. And the room watched him again. But not the same way. Not as entertainment. Not as curiosity. Not as judgment. This time. As recognition. Because now they understood. He had never needed to prove anything. And he never would. When he returned to the table, nothing looked different. The same linen lay perfectly pressed. The same glass of water stood where it had always been, untouched, catching the soft glow of the chandelier above. The chair waited in the exact position it had held before he stood. And yet, everything had changed. Because now, the table wasn't just a place to sit. It was a witness. He pulled the chair back slowly, the faint creak no longer sounding out of place. This time, it didn't feel like an intrusion into silence. It felt like a reminder that something real had entered a room built on appearances. He sat down with the same calm he had carried from the beginning. No rush. No performance. No trace of triumph. Just presence. A new server approached almost immediately, older than the last, movements careful, measured. There was no arrogance in his posture, no rehearsed superiority, only quiet respect. He placed the menu down with both hands, aligning it gently with the edge of the table as if precision might repair something invisible. "Sir," he said softly, voice steady but restrained, "please let me know if there's anything you need." The man nodded once. That was all. The server stepped back, not turning his back fully, not lingering too long, every movement deliberate, aware of the space he now occupied. Across the room, conversations resumed. But not naturally. They came back in fragments. Broken sentences. Short replies, laughter that ended too quickly. It sounded like people trying to prove that nothing had happened, while knowing something had. A woman near the window lifted her glass, then paused before taking a sip, her eyes drifting, not toward the man, but toward the space where the waiter had disappeared. Her expression held something heavier than curiosity now. Regret. At another table, a man leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, staring at nothing in particular. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a quiet, unsettled stillness, because the truth hadn't just exposed the waiter. It had exposed everyone. The manager remained standing at a respectful distance, not hovering, not intruding, but present enough to signal something had shifted permanently. He watched the room carefully. Not for service. For reaction. Because he understood now, this wasn't just about fixing a mistake. It was about what the room would do with what it had learned. The man opened the menu slowly. His eyes moved across the page, but not with hunger. Not with interest. Just observation. Like someone completing a motion that no longer held meaning. Because the night had already changed its purpose. The restaurant, for all its perfection, had revealed something imperfect. And once something like that is seen, it cannot be unseen. The manager stepped forward again, carefully this time. "Sir," he said, voice low, respectful, "if there's anything we can do, anything at all, please don't hesitate." The sentence sounded familiar. Rehearsed. The kind of line meant to restore balance. But there was something different underneath it now. Not control. Concern. The man looked up. His expression remained calm, but his eyes carried clarity. "I need you to do one thing," he said. The manager leaned in slightly, attentive. Ready. Because this was the moment where most situations turned into transactions. A free meal. A private room. An upgrade. A gesture that could be recorded, filed, and later used as proof that everything had been handled. "I need you to stop treating people like they only matter when you recognize them." The words didn't rise. They didn't echo. They simply landed. And that made them heavier. The manager's face tightened. Because there was no procedure for that. No checkbox. No policy. Only truth. The man glanced briefly toward the hallway again, where the waiter had gone. "If you fire him," he continued calmly, "you'll think the problem is solved." The manager didn't interrupt. He couldn't. Because part of him had already considered it. Removing the problem. Erasing the mistake. Returning everything to order. But it wasn't just him, the man said. Silence stretched. The line was already there. He just used it. A quiet ripple moved through the nearest tables. Not loud. Not dramatic. But real. Because people understood. Even if they didn't want to admit it. The manager exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just slightly. "What would you like me to do?" he asked. This time, there was no script in his voice. Only honesty. The man closed the menu gently. The soft sound felt louder than it should have. "I want him to learn," he said. Not harsh. Not demanding. Just clear. Not to be destroyed. Not humiliated. To learn. The manager nodded slowly. And this time, the nod meant something. Because it wasn't about saving face anymore. It was about facing something. Around the room, people shifted in their seats. Uncomfortable. Restless. Because this wasn't the ending they expected. No punishment. No spectacle. No reversal of humiliation for entertainment. Instead. Accountability. Quiet. Unavoidable. The man leaned back slightly in his chair, his posture unchanged, his presence steady. "And I want your staff to learn too," he added. The manager's jaw tightened again. Because that was harder. Much harder. It meant looking beyond one mistake. Beyond one person. It meant questioning the system itself. "Don't make it about optics," the man said softly. "Make it about people." Those words traveled further than anything else that night. Not through volume. But through impact. A woman near the aisle lowered her gaze completely now, unable to look up again. A man at the bar rubbed his forehead slowly, as if trying to process something he hadn't expected to feel. Even the servers moved differently. More aware. More careful. As if they had suddenly remembered that every table held a person, not a status. Near the hallway, a small movement caught attention. The waiter reappeared. But he wasn't the same. His posture had changed. No confidence. No control. Just hesitation. He stepped slowly, guided by the manager's earlier instruction, his eyes lowered, his hands empty. He stopped a few feet from the table. Didn't come closer. Didn't speak immediately. The room leaned in again. Because this was what they expected, the final moment. The resolution. The apology. The balancing of scales. But when the waiter spoke, his voice didn't carry strength. It carried weight. "Sir. I'm sorry. No performance. No volume. Just fragile honesty." The man looked at him. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Just clarity. "I know," he said. And somehow, that was enough. Because the apology wasn't for the room. It wasn't for the manager. It wasn't even for the outcome. It was for the moment the waiter could no longer hide from himself. The manager stepped in quietly, placing a hand near the waiter's shoulder, not forceful, just guiding. "Go," he said softly. And this time, the waiter obeyed without resistance. He turned again, walking away with slower steps. Not because he was being punished. But because he understood something now. Something that would stay long after this night ended. Back at the table, the man remained seated. But the room no longer saw him the same way. Not as an owner. Not as power. But as something far less common. Someone who had the power to destroy, and chose not to. And in a place built on status, wealth, and silent judgment. That was the most unsettling thing of all. For a moment, it seemed like the night might continue. The table was set. The service had corrected itself. The tension had softened just enough for the illusion of normalcy to return. Glasses clinked again, cautiously. Conversations restarted in low tones, carefully avoiding the subject that sat unspoken between every table. It looked like the restaurant had survived the moment. But it hadn't. Because some moments don't pass. They stay. The man sat still, his hand resting lightly near the edge of the table, the menu closed in front of him like a chapter already finished. The new server stood at a respectful distance, waiting, not pushing, not interrupting. Waiting for a decision. The manager lingered nearby, posture controlled but no longer confident in the way it had been earlier. He wasn't managing a room anymore. He was managing the aftermath of truth. "Sir," he said again, more quietly this time, "please, allow us to make this right." The words were sincere. But they carried something else too. Hope. Hope that the night could still be salvaged. That the damage could still be contained, that the story could still end the way restaurants prefer, resolved, polished, forgotten. The man looked up slowly. His expression hadn't changed. That same calm. That same quiet clarity. But now there was something final in his eyes. "No," he said gently. The manager blinked. Not expecting refusal. "Not now." "Sir, we insist." He shook his head once. Not dismissive. Not harsh. Just certain. "If I stay," he said, "you'll think this can be fixed with service." The sentence landed softly. But it carried weight that no apology could lift. The manager's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Because he understood. This wasn't about food anymore. It never had been. "If I sit here and eat," the man continued, "your staff learns the wrong lesson." A pause. That disrespect can be erased with luxury. Silence wrapped around the table again. Tighter this time. More personal. The manager lowered his gaze for a brief moment. Because there was no counter-argument. Only truth. The man stood. Slowly. Calmly. And once again, the room felt it. Not like before. Not as tension. But as awareness. People noticed. Of course they noticed. A man standing in a room like this always draws attention. But this time, it wasn't curiosity, it was recognition. Because now they understood who he was. And more importantly, what he represented. The chair moved back with a soft sound. No longer out of place. No longer an interruption. Just, real. The server instinctively stepped back, giving space without being told. The manager straightened, unsure whether to follow, to speak, or to stay still. "Sir," he tried again. But the man raised his hand slightly. Not to stop him. To acknowledge him. "I don't need anything," he said. And he meant it. No compensation, no apology beyond what had already been spoken. No correction. Just, departure. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. Simple. Unremarkable. The kind of thing that didn't announce power. But carried it quietly. He placed it on the table for a brief second, then picked it up again and handed it directly to the manager. Not the waiter. Not the staff. The manager. Because responsibility rests where authority lives. The manager took it with both hands, almost instinctively. A gesture of respect he didn't even realize he made. Their eyes met for a moment. And in that moment, everything was understood. No more words needed. The man turned. And began to walk. The room followed him without moving. Eyes tracking. Breath held. Because there was something different about this exit. No rush. No anger. No need to prove anything. Just quiet certainty. He passed table after table. And something strange happened. People moved, just slightly. A chair pulled in. A shoulder shifted. Space was made. Not out of fear. But out of awareness. A woman near the aisle looked up as he passed. Their eyes met briefly. She looked like she wanted to speak. To say something. Anything, that might release the weight sitting in her chest. But no words came. Because what could she say? Sorry? Too late. He gave a small nod. Barely noticeable. But enough. A silent acknowledgement. Not forgiveness. Not judgment. Just recognition. Then he kept walking. At the bar, the man who had watched the entire scene leaned back slowly, exhaling as if he had been holding his breath for far too long. He shook his head once. Not in disbelief. In understanding. Because something about tonight had shifted his view of things he thought he understood. Near the window, the woman who had lost her appetite pushed her plate slightly away. She didn't look up. Because she didn't need to. She already knew what she had seen. And what it meant. The man reached the entrance. The doors stood tall, polished, reflecting the warm glow of the interior. For a moment, he paused. Not dramatically. Not as a statement. Just, naturally. He turned his head slightly, looking back into the restaurant. Not at a person. At the room. At the place itself. The chandeliers. The tables. The people. The system. His gaze held no anger. Only clarity. Like someone seeing something exactly as it is. And accepting it. The manager stood near the host stand, still holding the card, his posture no longer that of control, but of responsibility. Their eyes met one last time. No words. None needed. Then the man turned back. Pushed the door open. And stepped outside. The door closed behind him with a soft, expensive sound. Inside. Silence. Not complete. But heavy. The kind of silence that doesn't come from quiet. It comes from thought. From realization. From discomfort. And slowly. The restaurant tried to restart itself. Forks lifted again. Glasses clinked. Conversations resumed. But nothing felt natural. Because something had changed. Not in the decor. Not in the service. In the people. A man at a corner table asked for the check earlier than planned. A couple near the center spoke in whispers, their voices tight, their laughter forced. Someone at the bar stared into their drink a little too long. Because the night had left something behind. Something that wouldn't be cleared away with plates. Wouldn't be wiped from tables. Wouldn't be forgotten with time. The manager remained still for a moment longer. Then he looked down at the card in his hand. His grip tightened slightly. Not out of fear. Out of understanding. Because this wasn't over. Not really. Across the room, near the hallway, the waiter stood just out of sight, but not out of consequence. His shoulders were slumped now. His posture smaller. His identity, once built on silent authority, cracked. He glanced once toward the entrance. Toward where the man had left. And for the first time that night. There was no arrogance in his eyes. No judgment. No certainty. Only realization. And something else. Something quieter. Regret. Not because of who the man turned out to be. But because of what he had chosen to be when he thought it didn't matter. Back in the dining room, life continued. But it continued differently. Because the illusion had been broken. And once broken, it never returns the same. The man didn't stay. He didn't need to. Because his presence had already done what no meal ever could. It had forced a room full of people to see something they had spent their lives avoiding. And now, they couldn't unsee it. After he left, the restaurant didn't return to normal. It only returned to motion. And there's a difference. Normal implies ease, comfort, forgetting. Motion is just what happens when people don't know what else to do with themselves. Forks moved. Glasses were refilled. Conversations restarted in careful fragments, as if the room collectively agreed to pretend nothing irreversible had just occurred. But the atmosphere had changed shape. It no longer felt like a place designed for enjoyment. It felt like a place trying to recover from awareness. The chandeliers still glowed overhead, casting their soft golden light across tables that now seemed slightly too perfect, too staged, almost artificial in their elegance. The music continued its quiet loop, but it no longer filled the space, it floated above it, disconnected. And beneath it all, there was silence that didn't belong to sound. It belonged to thought. The manager stood near the host stand, still holding the card the man had left behind. He hadn't put it down. Not yet. It felt heavier than it should have. Not because of what it was. But because of what it meant. He looked around the room. Really looked. For the first time that night, he wasn't observing guests. He was observing consequences. At a corner table, a man adjusted his collar unnecessarily, avoiding eye contact with anyone. A woman across from him stirred her drink without drinking it, lost in something far away from the restaurant. Near the center, a couple whispered, their voices low but tense. Not arguing. Not laughing. Processing. At the bar, a man stared forward, his glass untouched, his reflection staring back at him like a version of himself he didn't fully recognize anymore. And across all of them, there was the same quiet discomfort. Not fear. Not outrage. Something more unsettling. Recognition. Because the story they had just witnessed wasn't about one waiter. It wasn't about one man. It was about a system everyone quietly understood but rarely admitted existed. A system built on assumptions. On invisible hierarchies. On the silent permission to judge before knowing. The waiter sat in the back office now. The door was closed. No shouting came from inside. No dramatic collapse. Just silence. And somehow, that was worse. Because silence gave space for thinking. And thinking was unavoidable now. He replayed everything. Not as a story, but as fragments. The way he looked at the man when he first arrived. The way he adjusted his posture to signal authority. The way he smiled when he thought he was in control. The way the room responded, not with resistance, but with acceptance. And then, the shift. The moment everything inverted. He had expected anger. Shouting. Humiliation returned in equal measure. But that didn't come. Instead, he had been shown something far more uncomfortable. Clarity. And now he understood something he didn't want to. The man hadn't punished him. He had revealed him. Outside the restaurant, the world continued as if nothing had happened. Cars passed. People walked. Life remained indifferent to the small collapse that had occurred inside those polished walls. But inside, something had changed permanently. The manager finally placed the card down on a small ledge near the host stand. He exhaled slowly. Then turned toward the dining room again. But his posture was different now. Less controlled. More thoughtful. He began walking between tables, not checking service, not correcting staff, but observing. Seeing. A waiter passed him and instinctively straightened. The manager noticed. And for the first time, he didn't think about appearance. He thought about behavior. Not what was professional, but what was human. At one table, a guest asked for the check earlier than expected. At another, someone quietly complimented the food, but without enthusiasm. The energy was fractured. Not broken. But changed. And the manager understood something he couldn't ignore anymore. This hadn't been an isolated incident. It had been a mirror. At the far end of the room, a young server stood still, watching the floor as if unsure how to exist in it anymore. The manager approached him slowly. Not as authority, but as someone carrying responsibility. "You saw everything," he said quietly. The server nodded. "Yes." A pause. "What did you see?" the manager asked. The question wasn't procedural. It wasn't disciplinary. It was human. The server hesitated. Then spoke carefully. "I saw how fast we decide who matters," he said. The manager didn't respond immediately. Because there was nothing to correct in that sentence. Only something to accept. Across the room, a woman laughed softly at something her companion said. But even her laugh sounded different now. Smaller. More cautious. As if she had learned that laughter itself could feel inappropriate depending on who was watching. The restaurant was still full. Still elegant. Still expensive. But something had shifted beneath it. Like a floorboard no longer perfectly aligned. Invisible. But noticeable the moment you stepped wrong. Back in the office, the waiter finally stood up. He looked at himself in the mirror for a moment. Not the reflection he wanted. Not the one he used to see. Just himself. And for the first time, he didn't look away immediately. Outside, somewhere beyond the glass doors, the man who had left earlier was already gone from the street. No entourage. No spectacle. Just disappearance into the normal world. Like nothing had happened. But everything had. Inside, the manager returned to the host stand. And for a long time, he simply stood there. Watching the room. Not managing it. Understanding it. Because now he knew something he hadn't known before. A restaurant isn't defined by its chandeliers. Or its menu. Or its prices. It's defined by what happens when someone walks in and doesn't fit the story people expect. And tonight, that story had been rewritten. Not loudly. Not violently. But permanently. The waiter would remember it. The diners would remember it. The staff would remember it. But most of all, the room itself would remember it. Even if no one ever spoke about it again. Because some moments don't end when people leave. They stay in the silence afterward. And change everything that follows.